Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the November 25th, 2024 Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. Our clerk today is Ms. Sheila Gurry. We also have councillors attending electronically. I believe that we have Councillor Tyler Brown, and I know that Councillor Paul Manning is going to be joining us as well. So as an introduction of late items, there are none, so if I could ask for a motion for the adoption of the agenda. Councillor Thorpe, and to move, and Councillor, I have to get everybody's name now. This is a first for me for a while. Councillor Hemmings to, Councillor Eastmere to second. All those in favor? Motion is passed. Motion for adoption of the minutes is circulated. And Mayor Krogh to move, seconder Councillor Hemmings. All those in favor? Motion is carried. Agenda planning, the upcoming topics and initiatives by our Sheila Gurry, Director of Legislative Services. If you can take it, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good afternoon, Committee and Council. For your upcoming topics and initiatives, it is on page 9 of your agenda package, and it outlines some of the upcoming topics and agenda items that have been scheduled so far for your future GPC meetings. As well noted is your E-Town Hall meeting, which is not a Governance and Priorities Committee meeting, but it is a special meeting on December the 2nd, and that'll be at 7 p.m., and it's the E-Town Hall that is held annually to seek opportunity. It's an opportunity to seek community feedback on draft 2025 to 2029 financial plan. As well, December 9th, 2024, your GPC meeting scheduled is the parking management strategy, as well as transit-oriented areas and parking in the downtown. Those are both based on council motions, both of those topics. In January, we have January 27th, the GPC meeting, and scheduled is form and character design guidelines, and urban tree canopy management strategy. There's also social issues initiatives, which was based on a committee motion at the last Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. And then there are a couple future GPC topics with dates to be determined. There is a calendar on page 10 of your agenda that outlines the key dates for 2025 for Governance and Priorities Committee meetings. So those dates are noted on that page. And if there's any committee motions for future agenda topics, now would be a good time. And if not, that's all, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much. Any questions or comments or suggestions? Councillor Gusbrook.
Thanks, Chair. Through you, I'm not going to comment today, but just to flag.
That's my fault. It's my fault.
I think we're getting updates on the integrated action plan this Wednesday, and so I'll probably follow up with that. But there's the IAP item for the deconstruction and demolition bylaw for recycling construction and demolition material. So I'd like to follow up on that, but I'll touch base with our CAO and then probably submit something on the December 9th committee meeting just about creating a bylaw and then setting up a GPC for getting feedback on it.
Okay. Next, Councillor Hemmings.
Thank you, Chair. Regarding the January 27th, the social issues initiatives to provide an update on heating, cooling, and feeding centers, shelter spaces, I just wonder if Island Health is, I agree they should be there, but they're not really a partner in that work, and I'm wondering if we want to have a fulsome conversation about that topic, whether we should invite perhaps the SPO, perhaps some of our service providers. It just seems if we're going to talk about it, let's be really intent about it, rather than Island Health will say, you know, they provide nursing services 2 hours a week, and there's not going to be a lot of opportunity, I think, there for deep conversation. So just a recommendation or a suggestion.
Now, having said that, that afternoon is going to be a long one. Have we allowed enough time? Ms. Gurry, I'm just wondering your thoughts on that.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you to Councillor Hemmons, those are great suggestions. What I'm thinking right now is we've tentatively booked it in for social issues initiatives to be on that committee meeting. However, going forward, if we were to expand, we might want to look at putting it on a different date so it can be its own topic, its own discussion.
Councillor Hemmings?
I think that would probably be appropriate, and as one of the attendees, I would request that we invite the library, please.
Oh, okay. Anything else? Do we need a motion for that, Ms. Gurry?
Yes, please, Madam Chair. If we could just have a motion to expand upon the social issues initiatives by inviting other stakeholders such as, and Councillor Hemmons can list those.
Councillor Hemmings?
So I would recommend Vancouver Island Regional Library, the Systems Planning Organization, and the Systems Planning Organization brings with them a whole bunch of frontline service providers. I welcome input from others who are at those tables, but those two primarily,
Okay, I'll look for a
along with
seconder.
Island Health.
Councillor, I'm going to do this. Councillor Eastmere, I know, it's just new position at the chair here. Sorry about that. No, it'll take me a bit. So we're seconded by Councillor Eastmere. Again, I'm wondering, Ms. Gurry, do we have the time in that afternoon to have all of that?
Sorry, I'm recommending that we push this out
Push it out?
past that date, yeah.
Yeah, I was assuming we would move it, so that will be part of the motion. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments to this motion? Sorry. Councillor Gaspar?
So, yeah, I'm going to trust staff to help me with the wording here, but we're essentially going to move the Social Issues Initiative GPC to another date to accommodate an expanded conversation and include partners such as the Vancouver Island Regional Library and the Systems Planning Organization.
Councillor Manley?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to reassure the public that we are not waiting until January to deal with these social issues, that we are working on a plan and hopefully have something ready to go soon, because it's important for the public. I know we do hear from people about concerns about the change in weather and the number of people who are on our streets. So just for the benefit of the public, I want them to know that we are working on it and hope to have something ready to go soon. Thank you.
Excellent comments. Anyone else? Okay, there's a motion on the table. All those in favor? No one's opposed? Motion is carried. Okay, anything else on this discussion? If not, we'll move on to the next item. So we're moving on to Prosperous Nanaimo. This is under reports, the development cost charge and amenity cost charge programs, and to be introduced by Lisa Brinkman and Paul Rosen. Mr. Rosen, I think you're starting off. Is that correct?
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Yes, I'll just provide a brief introduction here. So the city has a development cost charge bylaw that helps us fund infrastructure required for growth. The last time that was updated was in 2018, early 2018, and at the time we were using infrastructure project cost forecasting based on 2017 or data that was a little bit older. So it's been about 7 years since the last update to the bylaw, and so there's been a lot of inflation. So I just looked before I came down here, and a typical water main, typical 8-inch water main, it's doubled in cost in the time frame that we're looking at, about 7 years. So it's gone up quite a bit. So some things have gone up a little bit less, but anywhere from 50% to 100% cost inflation on our infrastructure costs is what typically we're seeing. A few other things that have happened over the past 7 years is there's been changes in the development styles. So there used to be a lot more sort of single-family type. Now we're getting a lot more multifamily type development styles, and that impacts how we recover and spend DCCs. And then the third thing is there's been some major changes in the regulatory enabling legislation that allows us to recover DCCs for like fire halls and police stations and other things like that. So it's a good opportunity for us to be updating the DCC bylaw. Staff have been working for the better part of 2024 on developing the infrastructure requirements, so the project lists. We expect that we're going to be able to put some draft rates in front of council early in 2025. But given the complexity of the matter and the regulatory changes and so on, we wanted to make sure we had or provided some background to council. And so that's what this session's for. It's really about providing the background and explanation of what DCCs are, so on and so forth. There's also been some regulatory changes that allow us to adopt what's called an ACC, or an amenity contribution charge bylaw, and it makes sense to do those at the same time. So my colleague Lisa Brinkman's here to explain that. But before I hand things over to Lisa for a short explanation, I would just like to introduce Sean Heffernan and Laura Bernier from Urban Systems. They're two of the top development finance consultants in the province, and we're fortunate to have them working on our bylaw update. And so once Lisa's finished, we'll hand things over to those folks there. So, Lisa?
Just before you start, Councillor Hemmings has a question.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, can you say, sorry, that was my
That's okay.
mistake. Thank you, Chair. Sorry, can you just repeat the statistic? The infrastructure costs have doubled since, did you say early 2018 for a water main?
Through the chair to Councillor Herman. So what I looked at before I came down here was some indicator units. Like typically in our world, we have a bunch of different units. So like, to give you an example, like a volume of excavation or a per meter of different types of pipe, like water main or sewer, or a square meter of asphalt or something like that. So I looked at a couple of key indicators. So I looked at water mains, all inclusive of the services and all the fittings and basically everything in for a water construction. I looked at a sewer, I looked at curb, I looked at asphalt, I looked at a bunch of things. Water main itself has doubled.
Since 2018?
Since 2017, it has doubled. Other things like curb has maybe gone up by 50%. So there's really a range. It depends on the unit that you're looking at, but it's anywhere between 50 and 100% in inflation.
Thank you.
Ms. Brinkman?
Good afternoon. So Mr. Rosen already had the DCC project underway with the consultant Urban Systems when the province passed Bill 46 in late 2023, which allows municipalities to create an amenity cost charge program to collect funds for amenities such as recreation centers. So creating an ACC program is similar to creating a DCC program, but ACCs are less complex, and Mr. Rosen has the much more difficult task here for sure. So since these programs are similar, we retained Urban Systems to assist with creating the ACC bylaw as well as a tag-along project to the DCC project. And this will allow them to be considered together, and this will be especially important when we eventually need to assess the overall impact to the development community, and the final DCC and ACC rates can be looked at together. So after the presentation by Urban Systems, there is a staff recommendation for you to consider about what amenities staff recommend should be funded with the ACC funds. So similar to creating a DCC bylaw, the ACC bylaw requires us to decide in advance where to direct the ACC funds that are collected. So the projects that can be funded with an ACC funds must be related to growth, must be on land owned by the city, and must benefit current and future residents of Nanaimo. So 3 amenity projects are recommended, and we can talk about that, but I am getting ahead of myself. And so we'll allow Mr. Heffernan and Mrs. Bernier present, and then we can talk about that.
Thank you so much, Mr. Heffernan. Good to have you here. We'll let you start.
Yeah, thank you for having us, and thank you, Paul and Lisa, for the introduction. I'm just going to walk through a quick overview of our agenda here. So we're going to do a overview of the development cost charges and talk a bit about the program that's currently in place in the city. Then we're going to go through an overview of the amenity cost charges and kind of what some of the structure and framework for that would look like. We'll then talk about DCC and ACC implementation, as well as timeline, next steps, and opportunities for questions and answers after that. We're hoping to keep the conversation today relatively informal, so feel free to jump in and, with any questions that you have as we're going along. We've got a lot of material to cover, so it might be easiest just to kind of like work through those as we're going, because it's we're going to cover a lot of topics. So yeah, feel free to just interrupt us and let us know if you have any questions as we're going through.
Thank you.
So just doing a quick overview of DCCs. DCCs are they're legislated tools that have been created by the province to help communities recover the costs of off-site infrastructure needed to support growth and development. They're based on the principle of cost-sharing infrastructure between existing taxpayers, the existing users, and new development. They're a provincially regulated development finance tool. They're defined in the Local Government Act, as well as there's a DCC best practices guide to support the development of a DCC program. So there's a best practices guide for basically the implementation of DCCs, as well there's a guide for elected officials as well, so you can understand more about kind of the DCCs, how they're developed, and kind of the process behind that. There have also been, as noted earlier, some changes to DCC legislation, so now there's a broader range of topics and services that you can collect through Bill 46, and allows for kind of wider scope of DCC charges within a community. So behind DCCs, there's a philosophy of the benefit or pay principle. And essentially what this looks at is how can infrastructure be paid for equitably and fairly within communities. So DCCs are really meant to be a process that ensures a fair and equitable approach for the cost sharing of infrastructure. They help to support consistency in the delivery of these services and the collection of fees to support them. They also provide certainty in the sense that there are known fees that have specific rates associated for each service area, so that developers can know in advance what their expected contributions are going to be before they initiate a development project, and they also help ensure the timely processing of development applications. Prior to DCCs, there was other structures that were maybe not as defined or as clear. And that's one of the reasons why they were instituted as a development finance tool. So there was that fairness and consistency baked into the application of fees and charges for infrastructure to support new growth and development. The current development cost charge bylaw, as noted, was adopted in 2018. Since this time, the city has continued to grow, approximately 10% in that timeline. As Paul mentioned earlier in the conversation, there's been a lot of increase in infrastructure costs in this time. And as well, DCC legislation and best practices have also advanced. The city has also continued to update and refine its master planning and has created new master plans and identified new infrastructure needs since 2018. This is just a quick overview of how the DCC rate is developed. So we've kind of broken this down at a high level to just kind of help understand what are the elements that go into creating a DCC program. And again, this is done in alignment with the DCC best practices guide. So in this, we've kind of highlighted in the beige technical inputs, and then we highlight the municipal assist factor, which we'll talk about there, which is a policy input. So essentially, as part of developing development cost charges programs, to look and determine what is the growth you're looking to service over a particular time horizon. So based on that time horizon, and in this case, most programs are looking at 20-year time horizon at this point, we look at the estimated residential and non-residential growth over that time period to determine the number of units that will be serviced by future infrastructure projects. We then look at the capital costs and the associated projects that are expected to occur in that 25-year period or be required due to this growth. And that helps us determine the costs and essentially the amount of infrastructure you're expected to pay for to support growth under that time horizon and the amount of growth that will be paying for that. Each project in the program is assigned what's referred to as benefit allocation as well. And this is the cost sharing equation. Again, DCCs are not developer paid, they're a cost sharing tool. And every project we identify a benefit allocation based on the extent to which that project is expected to benefit new growth and development versus benefit the existing users and taxpayers. This establishes the foundation for the program and essentially creates the draft DCC rate. Within that, there is then the municipal assist factor. So this is a pure policy decision that is basically a decision of council to determine what degree council wishes to assist development. This is something that we'll talk a bit more about in some future slides, but essentially that's a policy tool. From these inputs, you've generated kind of the draft DCC rate, so to speak. So we can talk a bit more about that, but I just want to see if there's any questions before we kind of carry on here. I know that was a lot of information.
I don't see any. Go ahead.
Okay. So just a quick overview of what DCCs can pay for and what they cannot be used for. So again, it's clearly defined in legislation that DCCs can be used for the costs associated with planning, engineering, and design or studies for transportation services, water services, drainage services, sewer services, parkland acquisition and improvement, fire protection facilities, police protection facilities, solid waste and recycling facilities. So the legislation is very clear that this is kind of the limits of which you can implement and collect DCCs for. Again, we'll talk about ACCs in a separate discussion just after this, but they have another set of eligible costs that you're allowed to include in those programs. So in this, it's talking about infrastructure needed to support new growth and development. So DCCs cannot be used for anything that is, otherwise, operations and maintenance. You cannot be paying for infrastructure using to service existing population that doesn't have a benefit to new growth. And you cannot be using this for community buildings or facilities other than those mentioned for police, fire, and solid waste. So those are things that we can talk about under the ACC program. So we're going to go into each of those kind of elements of what goes into a DCC program a bit more detail here. I'm going to talk about the allocation of benefit. Again, this is when we talk about each project having a benefit allocation of basically how much it benefits existing users versus future growth. And in this, there's benefit allocation assigned between 1 and 100%. 0 being a project that is not growth driven, and 100% meaning it's entirely growth driven. So that would be, pure greenfield, infrastructure component that was only benefiting new growth and development. This percent is again based on how much the project will benefit existing versus future development, and this is to ensure that costs are equitably shared between existing and future users. So in this, we kind of have that spectrum, and most projects will fall, somewhere between that, 1 and 100%, with many in the middle. And it's very typical for an infill community, like a largely infill community like Nanaimo, to have a lot of cost-shared projects because they're happening in areas that, growth and development has already occurred, but you're getting infill and redevelopment and other things happening. So there's many projects in these lists that are cost-shared between new and existing users. Only if it's really benefiting a greenfield area would it have that 100% benefit allocation. So, on the low end, it's things that have a really limited benefit to future growth and development. In the middle, in the moderate space, with many projects kind of in that 25 to 75% range for Nanaimo, it's really talking about cost sharing based on how much the infrastructure is benefiting new and existing users. And to the high end where it's maximum possible recoverable DCCs, i.e. only benefiting really that future growth or development.
Mr. Heffernan, if you hold on, we just have a question from Mayor Krogh.
Thank you very much, and sorry to be one of the first to interrupt, but relying on your expertise in this and talking about the allocation of the benefits between existing taxpayers, future taxpayers, et cetera, obviously some communities have very, very high DCCs in comparison, and there's a number of factors in that. Is there a municipality in British Columbia where you think they have sort of hit the sweet spot, to use that overused phrase, where it is both fair, it's politically possible, it seems to work and allocated appropriately? Because firstly, I accept completely there's an awful lot of politics in this. Why Victoria's only 14 grand or whatever, I think, and Burnaby's 51 tells me something's not quite right here. So,
through the chair, I think it's based on the infrastructure needs of each community, and I think some communities have different challenges or different needs than others, and geography and other things can play a lot into that actually, and being a rural community versus an urban community, or infill driven versus greenfield driven, can all have like some pretty substantial influences. At the end of the day, it's not a pick a number game, so to speak, but there is that sweet spot, as you note, that there's a limit into which development can afford. At a certain point, if you set it too high, then you're not going to get any housing, and you won't get any revenue, and you won't need the infrastructure you're supposed to build because you won't have that growth. So there's a fine balance there where you don't want to have them be excessive. And in fact, it's clear in legislation that DCCs cannot be set at a rate that would prevent the development of reasonably priced and affordable housing. So there is an understanding that it's you need to pay for these infrastructure and services, because again, if also these infrastructure services are not delivered adequately, then the growth won't occur either because it's not serviced, or it has inadequate servicing. So yeah, it's a fine balance. And some communities have different rates for different reasons. The City of Victoria has undergone a recent update, so it's actually quite a bit higher currently, but and sometimes time has something to do with it. Some communities have gone a long time without updating their programs as well. So
that was a first-rate and excellent answer, I must say. but I'm going to press a little, if I may, through the chair.
Sure.
Are there some communities that you think are getting it right as opposed to wrong? Some are doing a better job of finding that spot where there is fairness, taking into account all the factors you've mentioned, geography, size. I mean, Victoria's a pretty small community compared to Nanaimo in terms of geography, much more concentrated development.
Through the chair,
If you can't answer, it's okay. That's an acceptable answer.
I'll maybe spare passing judgment or personal opinion is like right or wrong in these cases. I think in most cases we find that communities are required to pay for more infrastructure than they're able to capture through DCCs.
Yes.
I think at the end of the day, DCC rates probably could be a lot higher and still have, be used to pay for infrastructure that is needed. And I think a lot of times it's challenging to capture everything that a community needs. And where that line is, I think really depends on the ability of the property market, the development industry to still be viable and actually support as much infrastructure as you can, collect for through DCCs.
Once more and very quickly, Chair. So what you're really telling me is whatever we do, nobody will be able to point to an example where somebody's doing it righter or better or more correctly than we are.
Through the chair, I think it's again pretty subjective, but I think there is a place where if you're setting the rates so high that development can't proceed, then I would say that'd be doing it incorrectly. That's probably a good way to think about it, and not to have any surprises. I think in this program, there's probably the need for more infrastructure than the DCC program may be able to afford at this point.
Councillor Armstrong?
Yeah, thank you. 2 questions through you, if I may. When you're talking about that, we've seen a lot in the news recently, well, probably back 6 months, with the federal government talking about communities setting their DCCs too high, and they're not going to be allowing federal dollars going to those. Is there a number that they're looking at, or do you know what it is?
Through the chair, I don't think they've set a number as to how high it would be, but they have noted that for half funding for communities with populations over 300,000, so this wouldn't apply to Nanaimo, at least in my understanding, that they would require you as part of receiving that funding to freeze your development cost charges for I think it was a 3-year period. Yeah, so you'd have to kind of do the math, but you're not in that 300,000 category.
No.
But if you're
That could change still, you never know. And with the change in government, there's even talk of no DCCs being allowed for new builds. But my second question is when we're looking at this, have we consulted with the developers to see just how much they can accommodate without passing on huge amount of dollars back to the people purchasing or renting?
Yeah, through the chair, it's definitely the intention of this group to consult with the development industry. Typically, we do that when we have a finalized draft project list and draft rates for them to comment on. At this point, we don't kind of have the draft rates, and we would probably run those through council before going to the development community too. And that's what we'd look to get feedback on from them. And from there, you could do refinement, or you could acquire and potentially work with them to understand what that upper limit might look like.
Just a follow-up from my perspective, and I don't know how the rest feel, but I would rather hear from the developers first than us going telling them, because it's almost putting the horse before the cart, because we don't know what they can absorb. I can come and say 30% for the sake of argument. It's like, whoa. Like, I personally, this is a time when I think developers should have been at this meeting, so we could have had the big conversation. That was the purpose for GPC for me, but just my thoughts. Thank you.
Any comments to that, Mr. Heffernan, and we'll go on to the next?
Through the chair, yeah, happy to have conversations with the developers, and if that's guidance that you'd wish to provide, then that's something we can look at too. I think it'd be challenging to have a conversation without rates. I think unless there was initially some understanding, at least from the city's perspective, of what that affordability space does look like. And when I've done this in the past, sometimes there's been a level of analysis maybe on the city side to say, yeah, this is what we think is kind of a reasonable target. This is where we're at, and what do you feel about that? And actually getting the inputs from some of the developers too. Some are willing to kind of share what their numbers might look like, but that can be another entire exercise in its own.
Okay. Councillor Armstrong, did you have another comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say on that though, but we already have a set amount that we're looking at. So to me, it's like, or that's already there. how much can you afford to go up? And they're gonna come low amounts, whatever, but at least it gives us a stepping point that to see, and we can go from there. That's just my thoughts, I think. And that's what I've heard from the developers too, so thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rosen, did you want to make a comment?
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to add to the comment around consulting with the development community beforehand. One of the challenges is we've got these growth projections that we have established through city plan. So we have the population forecasts. And so for infrastructure like water and sewer, we know exactly how much infrastructure is required to support that population. So if we go and ask the development community and they say they can only afford so much, if it's not enough to build that infrastructure, you won't be able to grow. You won't be able to have the infrastructure there to grow. So for things like water and sewer, it's makes a lot of sense to figure out what you need first based on your growth projections. For other categories like transportation is a bit more, I guess elastic is the right word. So it's more of a judgment call on how much infrastructure you can get away with, how much you can afford. So I think that's one of the decisions that'll potentially be coming forward to council is how big is that project package for transportation. And then there's some other areas like, well, we know we're gonna need a fire hall. We know we're gonna need more room for police. And there's things like that we just know we're gonna need them. So I think that's why because we know we need the infrastructure to support the population. We know what that infrastructure is gonna cost. And there's very few of the infrastructure aspects that are elastic like transportation. So that's why we're intending to bring council the draft rates first. Okay. Work through that with council, and then once council is happy with those draft rates, then we would go out to the development community and get their feedback, and then report that back to council. So it'll be an iterative process with a bunch of back and forths.
Okay, well, let's continue on with the presentation then, so we'll get a little further down okay?
Thank you. I think this is an interesting slide then, kind of building on the discussion we're having actually, and that's the municipal assist factor. So this is a pure policy tool, and it's through the direction of council that local government basically can provide assistance to development if they feel the DCC rates are too high. So this assist must be made up through non-DCC revenue sources. It has, again, council discretion, can be anywhere from 1%, which is the least amount of assistance, to 99%, which is the most amount of assistance. And you can vary this assistance by program. So you can have a different municipal assist for roads or transportation than you could for water or for fire services. So this is actually the tool in legislation that the province gives council in this regard to say, if we do feel the rates are too high and we go to the development community and we hear that they're too high or they're unreasonable, then you can increase this municipal assist factor. And that would have the effect of reducing the overall DCC rates. And this is really the tool the province emphasizes because at the end of the day, it's like the more projects you trim out of your program, the least that can be used for DCCs. So by increasing the assist, you actually allow the program to remain whole, but you can reduce that overall cost to developers. And this is kind of the more, I guess, transparent and clear way to do an assistance to development through the development cost charges. And you can demonstrate to the development community too that you are reflecting on the proposed rates and proposing a reduction in DCCs. This can be done to phase in DCCs, it can be done to create an overall reduction, but again, it must be made up by non-DCC revenue sources. So this is essentially creating a bigger bill for the local government, but it does allow you to kind of set DCCs at a lower rate if you feel the draft DCCs that come in are too high. And that's something that you could respond to the development industry if you receive that feedback. So just noting that this is a purely discretionary tool. And again, it's emphasized over kind of fiddling with the project list, so to speak, to get where you want to go.
Okay, we have another question, Councillor Gasselbrook.
Yeah.
Thanks, through you, Chair. I think you pretty much answered it, but basically to that question, like say, if our DCC program, we notice over time, it's created a bit of a barrier for the rate of development that we're hoping to maintain in the community, we can adjust that assist level to fine tune exactly where that sweet spot is in terms of having some funding from the development pay for these capital projects while not being overly burdensome so that housing doesn't get built.
Yeah, so there's a number of methods you could use. You again could apply it for different service areas. You could apply it to all service areas, or you could set it in a bylaw where it was phased in too. If you felt the DCC rates were a big change, you could also, some communities have said, okay, well, we're going to start some of these programs with a 25% assist, and then year 2 they go down to 20, year 3 they go down to 15, etc. So it's a tool of council to respond to developer feedback around rates and costs.
Okay, Mr. Rosen had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that. So the city's current DCC bylaw has 1% assist factors for all the categories except water supply. Water supply is 25%. And it was done because of the reason is just because they were the highest category, highest costly category, and it was to provide a little bit of relief for the development community. The downside is that whatever assist factor, it has to come from taxation or user rates or some other source. And you still have to find the money, so it can significantly impact rates and taxation and so on. But that is I think what we're intending right now is we're going to bring the draft rates to council, probably with a 1%, the minimum assist factor, and then council can decide if you want to leave it the way it is or if you want to change that and increase it.
Okay, we have other questions. Councillor Vancerbroek, you're okay? Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, if I may. Yeah, just on the assist factor, I guess I've never really been clear on why we would have this option of an assist factor rather than simply choose to lower the DCC rates. Is it because it provides more flexibility, as Mr. Rosen says, for particular areas or projects?
Through the chair, that's correct. I think it is kind of the more transparent pathway that the province is. It's designated within the Local Government Act as a tool. So in legislation, it gives kind of council this power to vary the program. And it does give more flexibility in the sense that it allows you to keep your project list or your program whole and just kind of focus on what the actual rate is and that kind of reduction piece. I think at the end of the day, there's a vetting of projects that are, is occurring in those project lists before we bring it forward to council. And I think in most cases, it's probably trying to be as conservative as we can and have the projects that are, high priorities in terms of most likely to happen, most needed, most critical for that development to occur. And DCCs allow for the use of that funding. So you can then take monies out of your reserve fund and put it towards those projects. Having a project in the DCC project list doesn't commit you to building any of those projects. It's simply a basket of goods that you're purchasing through the DC program, and you're allowed to use those reserve monies towards those projects. In all cases, you should attempt to kind of build a list that you genuinely think those projects are needed and you're going to need them, within the time horizon, in this case, 25 years. At that point, the rate may still be higher than desired by councillors, the council itself, and the development industry may have feedback towards that. So that's where the assist is kind of that tool the province is pointing to in this regard to say, yeah, you can kind of set that rate at a lower place, or if you feel it's going to impact housing, you can set it lower and put it into place that way while still keeping your project lists whole. You will, again, have to compensate the program through another non-DCC revenue source, as Paul was saying. It could be through, utility rates or taxation and other sources.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll keep going with the presentation then. Thank you.
I'm going to pass it off to my colleague here, Laura.
Thank you, Sean. So we did want to provide a brief overview of the existing rates that are in place, as well as some community comparisons to some of the questions earlier, ensuring that, taking a look at what some other communities around Nanaimo are also doing. So these are the current rates for the city of Nanaimo based on the existing DCC bylaw, where SF would be single-family dwellings. So you can see here that the residential uses are charged on a per lot or a per dwelling basis, and a single-family home would be charged about $15,000 of DCC. There are small lots which are differentiated from larger lots of single-family homes, and they're charged $10,000. And then the multifamily dwellings are on a gross floor area basis at $89 a square meter. Commercial institutional rates are there as well at $77 and $20 a square meter. And then there are mobile home parks and campgrounds. So we wanted to note as well that there are regional district DCCs that apply for the city, which will layer on an additional charge to allow for a total of about $20,000 per single-family home. Now, with the new small unit housing legislation, which will allow additional density to occur, the likely focus of DCCs will be more on medium density and high density types of residential uses. So that's what we've done to compare some of these rates with some other communities in the area. So the first off here is the medium density rates, and we can certainly provide these for single family as well, but felt that medium density was likely the largest form of housing that's anticipated to occur over the time frame. So you'll see Nanaimo here, the 2018 rate is definitely sitting on the lower end of the spectrum. There are a number of updates that are underway, including Colwood and Victoria, which has passed their new DCC bylaw kind of within days here, and so it didn't allow us to update the charts included in this presentation, but these are sitting at closer to about $20,000 for medium density units.
May I just, is it pronounced Bernier?
Yes.
Ms. Bernier, you said this graph is 2018, is that correct? Or I see 2024, that's why I heard
Through
you.
the chair, that's
So
correct.
you can't go any, okay. You have nothing more current than 2018 for Nanaimo.
Through the chair, that's correct. These are based on the existing rates for Nanaimo. As we're developing, so we're currently developing the DCC programs and project lists currently and working with all of the groups within Nanaimo to vet those lists, and with finance as well, which in the next presentation to council, we hope to present the draft rates.
Okay. Thank you.
We also have a high-density residential unit comparison here, and again, you'll see Nanaimo is definitely some of the lower charges here. Many, again, are being updated. Victoria's has become even higher, so that high-density rate for Victoria, I believe, is sitting at, Sean, do you remember what that was?
I think it's, I don't know off the top of my head.
I believe it's about 15,000, give or take, but as well, Colwood will be updated. And so all to say that there is some space for growth here as Nanaimo's going to be growing and the infrastructure needs are increasing.
Yeah, I might note too that just for the context of council, like this is a very challenging comparison to make apples to apples. Again, going back to my earlier comments, like the servicing challenges of each community are very different, and kind of what's captured in DCCs can be different too. So, for example, I know the communities in the CRD are undertaking a regional water supply DCC potentially, which the CRD would be implementing, and that would be an additional 7,000 per multifamily unit, 5,000 per medium family unit for all communities within the CRD. And that kind of reflects like an interesting, comparison in services. So, for example, that's a cost that Nanaimo actually pays for as the city. So it's not a regional service here. It's something that's within your kind of water DCC program, which has that higher assist factor. Whereas that's an additional cost that would be paid for, if adopted by the CRD communities. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. I'm just posing that as an example. Whereas Kelowna can just put a pipe to the bottom of the lake and pull water out pretty easily. It doesn't have to be transported very far. So those are some of the things that kind of create the differences in these charges, and just something to keep in note that it's a good comparison, but it's not an apples to apples one.
Thank you for that, Sean. Yes, and similarly, Victoria, being an infill community, has a much more difficult time charging DCCs for infrastructure development where things are already built out, and it isn't a community that is adding density in some of the core areas to the same extent that Nanaimo might. So there really is variability based on how built out each community is and how much they can leverage a benefit to new development versus another community. And here we have a commercial rate, just as a comparison, where Nanaimo is kind of sitting in the middle on the commercial rates. So open to any questions about those, if there's any that come up. And seeing none, we'll move into some of the ACCs here as well. So ACCs really do function a lot like DCCs. They in terms of implementation and development of the program, they are very, very similar. The amenities that are provided through the amenity cost charges are meant to support environmental, social, cultural supports to growing communities and cities. So again, they're based on the principle of cost sharing, where new developments are contributing to alongside existing residents for these amenities as they're needed. Similarly to DCCs, they're also regulated by the province. They have been included in legislation, and for the meantime, there's interim guidance on how to apply them. And so we're working within those boundaries right now to ensure that amenities are adopted alongside the DCCs. One thing to note as well with the amenity cost charges is that they can't overlap with any other cost funding mechanism like community amenity contributions or CAC policies. So that's something staff will be looking to align as the ACC bylaw is adopted to ensure that there's no overlap or double dipping with another program. So in terms of what ACCs can and can't be used for, the interim guidance has stated that they can be used for most community-oriented amenities like youth, senior centers, recreation, athletic facilities, libraries, daycares, public squares, things of that nature. They cannot be used for housing, so the province has been pretty clear on that. And they can't be used for any projects that are otherwise eligible for a DCC. So for instance, if there are amenities that are eligible under a parks program, you would want to first include those in the DCC program, first and foremost, even if they're serving a community benefit. If they're eligible for DCCs, we would look to include them in that program first, and anything that's non-DCC eligible, we would look to.
Ms. Bernier, I'm going to stop you right there. We have
Yes.
a question from Councillor Manley.
Great.
Thank you, Chair. I'm curious about whether we could be paying long-term debt with ACC contributions. So, for example, if we were to build a community center in the South End, and then we have a large development going in there that would benefit from that community center, would the ACCs that they're paying on that development, could they go towards that paying down that long-term debt?
Through the chair to Councillor Manley. This is a great question. Unlike DCCs, ACCs can be used to pay off the principal debt that's incurred through the program. So debt costs can be included in the program and then paid throughout the years. So that does not need to be approved by the Inspector of Municipalities, those costs, in the same way that they would under a DCC program.
Thank you. That's great to know.
Yeah, I will note just a quick clarification there too, that DCCs, you can carry forward debt into future programs after DCCs, if DCCs weren't able to cover the full cost of those projects, but you cannot carry forward the interest unless you have approval from the Inspector of Municipalities. Again, DCCs have to be reviewed and approved by the Inspector of Municipalities. ACCs do not, and you're allowed to include both your principal and interest costs within those ACC programs. So they're a little more flexible in that sense.
But only for the projects they're assigned to.
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead.
Wonderful, thank you. Like DCCs, ACC projects have to be growth related. If they're not serving a function towards the future community and future residents, they should not be included on the list. And they can't pay for any operations and maintenance, deficiencies, or asset management costs. So the process of determining an ACC rate, it really is quite similar to DCCs. We would determine growth projections, where growth is occurring in the city. For instance, different growth nodes like the South End or otherwise. We would then identify what amenities are needed through that growth, and then determine the ACC rates. Similar to DCCs, it's best practice to go to consultation with those that are affected, so typically the development community. And then the bylaw would be adopted by council and would not need to be reviewed by the ministry. So as Ms. Brinkman mentioned earlier, we have some proposed ACC projects for which costs are still being refined with staff. The three projects that have been considered are the Bevan Park Master Plan. There's a number of new proposed buildings and flexible facility spaces that were highlighted as important to create funding for, as well as the central facility redevelopment and some amenity improvements. We also have funding towards community centers. Largely the South End Community Center was top of mind as we developed this project. For any reasons, this could be used for other community centers as well. And then there are improvements and expansions to the stadium district that were highlighted as a potential interest.
Oh, sorry, I've got a question from Councillor Brown.
you, Chair. Just a question on this. Just who is, like, I guess I'm curious on who's making up the individuals that are going through this list, and what criteria are they evaluating? Which projects here for council's consideration?
Ms. Bernier or Ms. Brinkman?
Through to the chair, and thank you, Mr. Harding. I see him coming up.
Jumping,
But
good.
also just to say, staff are reviewing the capital projects that have been presented in the last couple of years to council as important capital priority projects. And so these three have been on that list. And also in the integrated action plan, these three are identified as important capital projects that are also eligible through the ACC program and related to growth. So there's criteria within Bill 46 as well that to adhere to. So that this is staff's recommendation to fit those criteria, but certainly open for discussion.
Mr. Harding?
Thank you, Chair. I think also the main background to this was city plan, so working, which is also the PRC master plan. And so within there, identified a number of things that the community was really wanting us to look towards and work. And given the criteria of this bylaw, those three general areas are areas that give the council the most flexibility in providing recreational facilities. Bevan Park alone has a number of build-out opportunities for a number of years out, as would be the South End Community Center or another community center. Stadium District, again, is also a growing area that also deals with capacity, or growing capacity of a community.
Okay, Councillor Brown, did you have another question?
Yes, thanks. I appreciate that, and I understand there's restrictions with ACCs. I also understand that the legislation does keep it quite interpretive and open. So I'm just curious, can we be sent the things that were considered and the reasons they didn't make this list or they didn't make it to? I can just think of a whole host of projects. I have nothing ill towards these ones either. I think they're good projects. I'm thinking in terms of all the things. I'm curious on how items rated or didn't rate, and reasons why they might not have made this. This would be a significant move forward and a significant decision. So I'm just looking for a little bit more information on what didn't make the list and why not.
Mr. Harding?
I asked Ms. Brinkman maybe to add to that, but I think we went through, again, these were just to focus on, these ones that came up high on city plan. There could be other areas, and I think as the program gets refined as we go through the public input processes, as things come through, council can refine that, add some areas or take some areas off, is my understanding. These are three areas we thought we'd focus on. These are plans that have been approved, areas that have information for it. For example, council has an approved master plan for Bevan Park, which has a number of build-out opportunities,
So
as do the other two areas.
So if we were to go, let's just imagine if we're going forward and developing a bylaw, at some point we could in fact look at what the projects were and make a decision about these projects. Is that correct, or is?
That's my understanding. These are ones that we've initially come to approve, so we can give the consultants some more direction to come through. We think these are three big areas that would keep the city going for probably focusing on this for 30 or more years. But I'll ask Ms. Brinkman some more details.
Ms. Brinkman?
Just to add, so one of the next steps that we will be doing with this project is to do a high-level cost estimate. So it is helpful for staff to have some direction on what amenities are interested for council to fund, and then we will do a high-level cost estimate, and that then reflects on the potential ACC rate at the end of the day. So that's sort of the next exercise. I don't know if our consultants have anything to add.
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Something to, just through the process of working with staff, I think there were a number of projects that were identified, for instance, through the Parks DCC, which some projects were not eligible under the DCCs. So we did take a look at some of the Parks projects that didn't make that list, and it did create a very long list of smaller projects, and there was some strategic thinking that some of the larger projects might be more difficult to fund in advance, and so many communities have decided to focus on some of those larger initiatives in their communities, and that was one line of thinking around developing this ACC, but certainly open to guidance from council on what areas are desirable to focus on as a priority.
Councillor Brown?
Yes, thanks, Chair. I don't think I might not be communicating or articulating this particularly well, but you know, the particular motion in front of us is that, or the recommendation, anyways, is that council direct staff to proceed with the development of ACC program for three particular things. Like I said, I don't think those are necessarily bad things. What I'm thinking though here is there's significant cost to all three of those. There's other projects that will have significant costs. And so if someone was to ask me, hey, why did you pick these three to develop an ACC program? What I'm asking for is the information to say, oh, this is why. And so I'm just curious if we can be sent that information or have that provided rather than just, here's three, let's proceed kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Mr. Harding, just a little more.
Yes, absolutely. We can send how we've come up with these, and of course, the council can choose others or limit others as they go through this process. If council has a specific project that they think the community wants, and that can be included also. These were broader ones, again, that had been tested through the city plan process, and thought it would give council flexibility and the community flexibility in three pretty different geographic areas for this community also.
Okay, so we're not done the presentation yet, but the motion is pretty clear. Are you thinking that you would send us that information before these motions would go forward? Is that the idea, or we'll continue on? I'm just not sure what direction you're hoping to take us through.
So that's a decision of council. If you're comfortable with the recommendation today, if you'd like to postpone it, that's fine too, until you have this information. So that's, I think.
Okay, so we'll continue on. We have the next question from Councillor Gasselbrock.
Thanks. Just one question I have, like I'm interested sort of in the scope of other projects that were considered or could be considered, just to have a look through it, and we'll get to that later on. But I've got a question just involving the overlap between CACs and ACCs. And so the CAC program was something we established a few years ago, and it targets community amenity projects, a lot smaller in scope. And I'm not sure, is the new legislation with the ACCs kind of hoping to replace that to give more clarity to the development community just in terms of predictability of costs and that? I'm just curious sort of what is the long term, because I guess there are a lot of things that we'd like to put money towards, and this is definitely narrowing it. And I'm curious, if we're going to be losing the CAC program, then we kind of just have these big bang things, and there's a lot of smaller, trails and a lot of other things that kind of get lost. So just you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, through the chair, I can speak to that. Yeah, so the legislation around ACCs does highlight that there should not be an overlap between the ACCs, your DCC program, any CAC programs, or density bonusing programs. So they're meant to function independently, and I do believe the province's intent behind ACCs was to create a more transparent and clear tool to guide the provision of amenities, rather than CACs, which are voluntary and only really done at time of rezoning. This was meant to provide like a more consistent framework for capturing value behind amenities. And I think that's part of kind of the discussion too around building the project lists, right? Like ensuring there's no overlap with the development cost charge program, which can do a bunch of parks things, but there's some things it can't do. Like it can't do certain types of amenities or specialized user groups. And to understanding in your program, like what is best funded through another program or another project source. So some things like childcare you may be expecting to get more funding for from provincial or federal sources. So maybe those aren't the highest priority projects, or some things may be more general through your CAC program. So none of those things can overlap. And so there's definitely kind of a bit of a strategy to like, what is the best tool for collecting, for a particular type of amenity. And in that regard too, there can't be that overlap, and there needs to be a sense of like what tool is best suited for what type of project.
Okay, thanks. So just to follow up on that, just to staff, like, are we going to continue with our CAC program once we have the ACC program in place, or kind of what, or we just do all of them?
So through the chair, so the intention definitely we would need to amend the community amenity contribution policy that was endorsed a few years ago. But at the time of a rezoning application, there will still be, and when we amend the policy, I think what we're considering is that there'll still be an opportunity to negotiate for amenities. You know, often it's a piece of land, maybe it has a beautiful riparian area that would connect to an existing riparian area. So at that time, staff would identify that and be able to negotiate to still, you know, to have that as public land as part of that rezoning process. So there still will be that opportunity through rezoning. But one thing that's in the CAC policy right now is a per unit rate as a, you know, recommended. And so I'm not sure, you know, that rate will probably need to be, if there is an ACC charge, that rate may need to be reconsidered. So we may not be collecting as much, or that per unit rate as part of the CAC policy if there's an ACC bylaw in place.
Okay, so we will have to, once this is in place, we'll have to go back and look to amend our CAC program. And with the current CAC program, I know the intent with the province is to just have more clarity and predictability in the process. I know some municipalities like really get into negotiations around the rezoning. Our CAC program was pretty cut and dry, and compliance was, you know, I'm not sure if it was 100% compliance, but most people contributed to our CAC program. Did that program have the same level of flexibility? Like, I guess there's a certain maximum amount that we can ask from the developers, and we either, you know, go to this ACC program and have to adjust our CAC program, but there's a certain max. I'm guessing, I'm just asking, like, is this a better way to do it than what we currently have with the CAC program?
Through the chair, maybe just to say, so with the CAC policy, that's only secured at time of a rezoning application. So you're only getting it for those applications that require a rezoning, and then often the amount is collected at time of building permit, but only if it's had a rezoning application. Whereas an ACC is collected at time of building permit for all units,
right,
or whatever units we determine through the program to apply it to. So we would be potentially collecting more, and so that fund, the ACC fund, would hopefully build a little faster than the CAC fund is currently.
Okay, thanks. That's the clarity I needed. Thank you.
Okay, let's continue on. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Lindsay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just going to build on what Ms. Brinkman said. And absolutely, I think it's important for council to remember we just went through this process of pre-zoning a significant amount of land in the city. So the actual number of rezoning applications that come forward, I think you'll expect to see be less and less. I think one of the things that local governments have been advocating for years is something like an ACC program, so that we can set a clear and consistent charge that everybody's aware of and that applies to all developments. It won't be just rezonings, it'll be the 1,000+ units that we build every year. I think the trade-off in that, and the earlier question was about, you know, development industry. I think at the same time, province-wide, these discussions about ACCs coming in, I think for many in the development side saw, I don't want to say an acceptance, but a willingness to pursue ACCs with kind of the understanding that there would be a clear understood going into a development what the charges were, and reduce or eliminate the need for community amenity contributions and those negotiations. So I don't think has to be off the table, but in terms of, if you go back to the development side, I think the expectation is if we're going to do this, that we bring some certainty to the table in exchange for having a new charge.
Okay, Mr. Holm?
Sorry, yeah, just to add to that too, there are some other tools that the province has brought legislation in to fill in some of the gaps and made some changes to. They existed previously in the case of density bonusing provisions, but the rules have changed around that, and it's something that we're going to have to update going forward. We've got plans to do that in the coming year. As well, the province has introduced inclusionary zoning provisions as well that we'll have to look at how these interplay together. the city's community amenity cost charge program that's applied through rezoning at the time of rezoning. As Mr. Lindsay's mentioned, it'll apply less as more land is pre-zoned. It was developed to give developers planning on rezoning property certainty and what the expectation would be around community amenity contributions. But yeah, there's some more adjustment that we'll be looking at going forward, adjusting to the new tools that the province has provided and some of the rules they've changed around those tools, the density bonusing provisions and the inclusionary zoning as well. And we're still, some of those are still, the province is still providing clarity on, but we're planning on, we have to do some work working with consultants and bringing forward updates to our zoning bylaw, as well as other tools. There's a tenant protection bylaw. There's other layers of tools that the province has given us that will kind of interplay with some of this as well, that will apply to property that is zoned and going through development approvals as we go forward, rather than just at the time of rezoning. It used to be that, and until the province has introduced a lot of these changes, the only opportunity, or one of the only opportunities local governments had to enforce some of those provisions and to achieve some of those policy objectives was at the time of rezoning. That's changed quite significantly with all the legislative changes that the province has introduced. There's still some work to do on implementing those.
Okay, Councilor Gasbrook.
Sorry, just another follow-up. And so I guess just building on this, like, you know, these projects here have, you know, they're in our integrated action plan. There have been big priority capital projects. Now, with the changes to the CAC, I guess it's a matter of scale, though. It's like, you know, there's going to be a lot of buildings going up, and before say the CACs would go to like a little piece of public art, you know, shared communal space, a pathway. If we're going to be losing that inflow of cash for those things, I guess my concern is we're going to see the quality or of those more localized scale amenities where we had some additional funding coming in to like provide them, all of a sudden that's going to be shifted to just taxation, and there might be more money for these big projects, but what's going to happen to the funding pool for those smaller things? Because my fear is that I'd hate to, you know, have not very livable spaces at the expense of having, you know, some nice big centralized amenities.
Ms. Brinkman?
Through the chair, I think at time of a rezoning application, you know, if it's a site that really, there needs to be, say, a pedestrian connection like you talked about through the site, so securing that right of way or easement through the site, staff will still have that ability to have that discussion with a developer for a proposed site for those smaller features that make sense in that location. And council will also have that opportunity through rezoning process to secure that as part of a condition of a rezoning application. So, and when we can certainly design the updated CAC policy to reflect those interests, absolutely. So I think there's still the opportunity to secure some of those smaller amenities site by site as needed through rezoning process.
Okay.
And development permit process for that matter as well.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, and I guess like these projects are easier to cost out to add into an ACC program, but like, is there a way that we potentially could have sort of like a more localized scale improvement fund that could be part of the ACC?
No. That's not possible, right?
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Like those projects don't fit in. Like say for the small, you know, foot past, like smaller amenities are more localized in that area where the building is going in, to have contributions from the developers towards that can be secured through an ACC program.
The ACC has to be designated for a particular project, is that right? I'm just afraid we're getting ahead of ourselves. I'm not sure that we...
Correct. And also the other thing to keep in mind for the ACC, if it's a charge that's across the whole city, it needs to be an amenity that would potentially benefit all future users and current residents of Nanaimo. So that is one reason we really felt these three amenities kind of fit that criteria, because I think it's true that, you know, there's things at Bevan Park that everyone in the city currently uses and in the future will use. And so, and similarly at the Stadium District, so, and any community center. So that's why, and those also aren't amenities that we typically kind of negotiate for through a rezoning process, is kind of funds towards those. So that was sort of
Gotcha,
the rationale for these, yeah.
Let's move on. Thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Bernier.
Thank you very much. A great discussion, for sure. We did want to provide a high-level overview of some of the comparable ACCs that have been developed to date. There we go. So because ACCs are such a new tool, not that many communities have passed a bylaw, a final bylaw on what their ACCs are. So these are the 4 communities that to date have passed an ACC bylaw. Abbotsford is still proposed here. However, you can see that the rates are very variable. This is still something that is an emerging practice across the province. People have included a wide variety of level of funding that's desired through these programs. The District of North Vancouver has a medium density residential per unit charge of almost $40,000 for ACCs versus Abbotsford, which is almost $4,000. So this would depend on how much growth is projected, would be one of the factors in determining why these rates are so variable, as well as just what the program costs are in each of those programs as well. These are some of the comparisons for the high density unit charges, as well as the commercial unit charges. And as Nanaimo develops their proposed ACC rate, we'll be able to add that additional information onto these comparison charts as well. Okay, with that, I'll pass it back to my colleague, Mr. Heffernan.
All right, I'm just going to take you a bit through kind of the deadlines and next steps here, as well as some of the key things for DCC implementation. You know, as noted, we've had a quick discussion there that engagement with key stakeholders is a priority of this project. We'd be looking to engage with interested parties as part of the DCC and ACC updates once we receive direction from council to do so. In this, we would share with them the draft rates, the draft project lists, and receive any feedback on the proposed DCC and ACC programs. Just quickly too, as part of some of the implementation elements of DCCs, I'm going to talk quickly about kind of the process. One is exemptions. So there are a number of exemptions outlined in the Local Government Act for buildings of public worship, developments that do not impose a new capital cost burden, and where DCCs have been charged previously. And then there's exemptions for building permits under 50,000, residential units under 29 meters, and you can exempt collection for developments with less than 4 units. So those are exemptions that can be varied by council. In many cases, we suggest that the council include in the bylaw the ability to collect for developments with less than 4 units, and those others are varied too. So you can increase, for example, the value of building permit for that exemption too. So you could turn that to 100,000. However, we do find these, these are fairly consistent across communities, and building $100,000 building permits probably won't get you much anyways these days. So these are just statutory exemptions that exist in the DCC legislation. In ACCs, you cannot charge ACCs for development that does not result in growth, and where ACCs have been previously charged, and in some cases, affordable housing. So the legislation does particularly note that ACCs cannot be charged on development that would generate affordable housing within the community. Though that's baked into the ACCs, there's another element of legislation referred to as waivers and reductions that can be created for both ACCs and DCCs. There is, I guess, a clear framework for this. So the legislation does outline the certain eligible forms of development where you can waive or reduce development cost charges. So that's for not-for-profit affordable rental housing, for-profit affordable rental housing, and housing designed for reduced environmental impact or greenhouse gas emissions.
Mr. Heffernan, we have a question. Councillor Hemmings.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to confirm my understanding here. So we're saying that we can waive DCCs for housing designated for reduced environmental impact, but we currently provide density bonusing. So as we go forward, we're going to have to choose whether it's density bonusing or waiving of DCCs for projects that have a green element.
Through the chair, I don't think the provision of density bonusing would necessarily mean that you couldn't have that waiver or reduction, but if you're already doing it, then you probably want to make sure they're consistent or that there wasn't like an overlap in those two things. I think too, in that you'd kind of have to define what is meant for any of these categories, and that's what we've suggested. If council is interested in waivers and reductions, that you establish another bylaw to waive or reduce any eligible developments, and that bylaw would define what thresholds those developments would be required to meet and the extent of a DCC waiver or reduction that they would receive. And we typically suggest doing this through a separate bylaw so it can be updated and repealed and adjusted as needed once it comes into place. Again, those definitions to align, you could either align it with your density bonusing and institute it like that, or you could look at one or the other and see which one was best.
Okay, thank you. Keep going, go ahead.
So yes, ACCs, you can have waivers or reductions for not-for-profit affordable housing, for-profit affordable rental housing, for-profit affordable rental housing, and housing subject to requirements under affordable or special needs housing zoning bylaw. So I guess the eligible categories are a little different between DCCs and ACCs, but in any case, you would look to define those through a waivers and reductions bylaw, and that would just determine what is eligible, what was required to meet those reductions, and what proportion the DCCs would be waived or reduced. Again, same as with the municipal assist factor, any amount of DCCs or ACCs waived or reduced would have to be made up through a non-DCC or ACC revenue source. So it'd have to be made up entirely through existing tax dollars or another source of revenue.
Okay.
Just quickly now into in-stream protection. So this is again another element of legislation that once a DCC or ACC program is adopted, development with in-stream applications shall be given a 12-month grace period where they would not be required or subject to those new rates. So this would be for in-stream building permit applications and in-stream subdivision applications. This would also apply to any precursor applications, which could include rezoning, a development variance permit, a development permit, and other things like that. So if you have in-stream applications, and we define this typically as that the application has been received, the fee has been paid, and that is determined to be complete by staff, would receive a 12-month in-stream protection from the new DCC rates. So this allows them to kind of proceed with their developments and have a 12-month period in which to complete their building permit or subdivision application.
So all the current fees that we have would still be?
That's correct, for a 12-month period, and that is in legislation, so it's something that cannot be varied.
Okay.
Any questions?
No questions, no.
Just getting into kind of the final elements here. So the last is DCC credits. So DCC credits can be deducted from DCC's levy to reduce the total DCCs payable by the applicant. There's one we refer to as kind of an existing use credit. So this is where you take an existing development and it's redeveloped into something else. They would receive a DCC credit for the existing use that is on that land. So if we say took a low-density residential single-family home and converted that into 4 townhouses, the charge for that development would be 4 townhouses minus 1 low-density single-family home rate. So that's just something to note, that you don't charge for the use that was there essentially before unless they do a change of use or they rezone into a different residential land type. So you may charge that if they were, say, going from a single-family use to a commercial use. So that's just a little bit of mechanics. The second is a works credit. This is another, point that developers may receive credits for delivering capital works within a DCC or ACC program. So this is if they were required to complete offsite works as part of their development, and that those works were within the DCC project list, then they would receive a DCC credit. So if they were required required to construct a $1 million pump station, and that was in the DCC program, then they would get $1 million of DCC credits in that regard. So basically, in some cases, there's an opportunity for the development industry and others to kind of help you with the implementation of the program. A credit system allows them to do that, and that's something that is noted in the DCC Best Practices Guide. This is also another reason for including projects within your project list that you intend to build or you think that would be required. Again, if the project list is changed in a way that may reduce projects, then you may lose some of those developer credit opportunities too. So that's another thing in terms of using the assist versus reducing the number of projects. DCC credits can be actually an important tool for helping to deliver the program in a shared manner with the development industry. Just kind of on the wrap up here, or just talk a little bit about timelines. So again, we've done the background work of estimating the growth, developing the DCC and ACC project lists. We've provided the draft assist factor, but again, that's entirely up to council's discretion to alter as they wish. We've calculated the draft DCC rates at this point.
Councillor Hammonds has a question.
Thank you, Chair. If I may go back to the previous slide, I just want to clarify something I'm thinking of here. So say we chose the South End Community Center as one of our DCC projects. We have a development going in. They provide extended works in that area. Who determines the area of that DCC project? And sorry, maybe I'll just start there. How do we determine the immediacy of that DC, like the area that they're in?
Through the chair, it's actually more cut and dry than that. If there's a project in the DCC project list and developer provides that to you, then they are eligible for DCC credits. So it just needs to be in the list. And I think what you're referring to is more like a latecomer agreement where you would kind of set an area and a payment strategy to cover those excess and extended services if required by staff. Whereas if they're in a DCC program and developer delivers those works, then they just get the credits.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Do you see Tyler?
Oh, hold on. Councillor Brown also has a question.
Thanks so much. It's on that slide that we were just at, the timeline. I don't want to harp on this, but it says develop DCC and ACC project lists, and then kind of earlier was the comment that we could have some discussion around that, but there's no little gray box that says council input. So I'm just, again, curious on the process here, and it's not that I think these projects are bad. I actually think they're good. It's just I've seen zero justification on how they were chosen, and they have significant costs. So I'm just trying to understand where that conversation occurs in this process.
Through the chair, typically in a DCC process and ACC process, the project list development and growth inputs and things are kind of the technical background work, so to speak. There'll be dozens, maybe hundreds of projects total in the DCC program. So it can be a challenging exercise to kind of vet those openly.
Sorry, I'm only speaking, I want to be very clear here. I'm only speaking to the ACCs. DCC programs, they're not a new thing. ACC projects and programs are. And they're very broad, whereas DCCs are technical and very specific. So that's where I'm trying to understand here on that ACC program, in particular the amenities that are chosen for projects, where is the discussion or at least the background information being provided on those?
Mr. Lindsay is going to respond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think when we bring back the ACC rates, I think this is kind of a primer today. I think the real interest will be when we actually cost out all these projects and bring back to you the draft rates. I think if we had those projects that we've talked about today in front of you, and if we explained what the ACC rate would be based on those projects, we could then include other projects that council may wish to add or replace. That could then, you could have a discussion at that time about whether, the right projects were there, or if you needed to add more of the projects, or if there's projects because of the ACC rate that comes out of it, might be that you might want to take out a project. You might want to have a reduced ACC rate. So I think there could be space to have that discussion when we present the ACC rates to council.
Okay, Councillor Armstrong.
Thank you, yeah.
Sorry, if I could just
Oh,
follow
I'm
up on
sorry.
that, Chair.
Mr. Brown.
Yeah. So, yeah, I appreciate that, but again, what I'm trying to understand here is 3 have made it as recommendations. I'm curious as, say, something like the waterfront walkway didn't make it, or, you know, we've talked a long time about daytime drop-in center and things like that. There might be elements that are ACC. I'm not saying that we should fund those things, but I'm trying to understand is how did 3 recommendations for projects make in front of council to begin with?
Without council's endorsement, is that right?
Not endorsed.
Yeah, it's not endorsement. I'm just actually, you know, I'm just trying to see, like, you know, you do your homework, where's the work? I'm trying to, you know, understand how these 3 made it. And I appreciate that there would be future conversations, but again, that doesn't help me understand how did 3, that, you know, there's a certain bias once a recommendation is in place on how things move forward.
Mr. Lindsay?
So I think the best I can offer, because I think other staff could probably speak to this better, but I think the best I could offer is when you actually look at the amenity cost charge language in the legislation, and it does talk about there's going to be further work done on this and further guidance, but it talks about examples of an amenity being a community center, a recreational facility, a library, daycares, or public squares. So when you look at that list that's provided, and then you look at council's priority list in the integrated action plan, the ones that rise to the top are the ones I think that staff have identified. Could there be others in there, and is there flexibility in there for other projects? Probably, but I would also say, like, some of the things we've talked about, like trails and other amenities, you can still collect for under DCC, so I don't want that to be lost. Park acquisition, park improvements, those still exist under DCC bylaws, so there's still some space there, but I think it's a combination of council's previously stated priorities against the kind of framework that this new ACC program is, which on the surface talks very much about community centers, recreational facilities, and the ones you have are ones that are our priorities.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I don't want to, you know, I feel like I'm getting a little argumentative here, and I don't mean to with staff, but I would just say that the legislation says those things, but it precludes that without limitation. So I think you know, I would hope we'll have some discussion in a future date. I'm worried, and I hope we can have some, if the recommendation does move forward, have some information prior to the council meeting before the recommendation would be endorsed by council.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councillor Armstrong?
Thank you. Yeah, I just sort of wanted to agree with Councillor Brown as well. To me, this would have been a great thing to bring to council. Here's like 10 projects, and let us go through the projects with staff and come up with those priorities. I think that was the whole purpose of part of the GPC, and then we would have been in a much better position to say, this is why these 3 were, and we were part of the discussion. So for me, for future, it's something I would like to see come to this table first before a decision is made. Thank you.
Mr. Lindsay?
If the committee certainly wants to take that step and have staff come back with more fulsome options for the ACC, I think it's a little difficult to really, for council, to be fair, to talk about which projects unless you have an idea of what the costs are. And then when we do come up with an ACC rate, I think it's fair to say that there's going to be pressure on council when you look at the DCC rates to make sure that the ACC rates aren't adding significantly more pressure based on the discussion you had earlier. All of these things are going to come together. But if council wanted to take that step and insert a step in between this table here where we come back specifically about ACC options, we'd be happy to do that.
Mayor Krog?
Thank you very much, Chair. And just to go back to the recommended motion, it says that the Governance Priorities Committee recommend that Council Rec staff to proceed with the development of an amenity cost charge program that includes the following facilities, names of Evan Park, Stadium, etc. It doesn't exclude anything, and so it seems to me even the recommended motion itself already contemplates that there would be other projects, and I'm with Councillor Brown in this. The waterfront walkway, which has been a very popular but incredibly expensive proposition, has been on the table for a number of years. So, as I say, I think we're spending a fair bit of time arguing about something in which there is a consensus.
Mr. Holm?
Sorry. Thank you, through Madam Chair. Just to highlight too, and Ms. Brinkman or Ms. Bernier could probably speak to this better too, but I know we've I've heard reference to the waterfront walkway a couple of times, and I think there's some challenges around including that, as my understanding is ACC projects have to be on city-owned land. So there's some challenges around that. I think Ms. Bernier could speak to that more if needed, but as well as, say I heard daytime drop-in center wouldn't be necessarily excluded from a recreation facility, but it would again have to be on city-owned land. But yeah, definitely, this is obviously the DCC program, a very technical exercise. The ACC program, obviously, there's some opportunity for council to, set priorities and on these projects, and we've taken the previous discussion with city plan priority direction, as well as some of the capital projects that have been discussed. But there's definitely is. Mayor Krogh had referenced ability to expand on this list, but these are three high priority projects that were identified based on the facilities priority work that council has done up to this point, and the qualifications that have to align with the legislation for the ACC projects.
Ms. Bernier, and then I'd like us to finish the presentation, so go ahead and answer and then go from there.
Thank you, Mr. Holm. Yes, I think that's a great point there. Waterfront walkway is coming up a number of times. It was considered under the DCC program. To Mr. Holm's point, there were challenges with tenure around the waterfront walkway. There are elements of it that were considered through that process, and we can certainly get back to council with more details on some of those pieces which were considered in the ACC project and the rationale for those. The ACCs can allow for projects that have public-private joint partnerships that have been agreed upon, and so that's something that could be looked at again under council's direction to consider other projects for the ACC.
So that was just a little bit fast. So you're saying that a project like the waterfront walkway could be paid for in part
we
by
can
ACCs?
revisit that project certainly to see whether there's eligibility through a partnership agreement if that has been put into place. It was considered through the DCC process, and we can certainly provide rationales for the ACC projects that have been considered and why they were not included based on the legislative rationale for that.
Okay. All right, let's continue on with the presentation. We'll finish up and then have some more subsequent questions, I'm sure. Did you? No, okay.
So just to conclude kind of the final part of this slide, so yeah, we would look to, again, bring those draft rates forward. I guess if there's another step, that's direction we'll receive today. Then we would consult with stakeholders. Then at that, we'd bring back that feedback and potentially look for either evolving the DCC and ACC programs or ask for 3 readings, depending on the feedback received. Then the DCC program must go forward to be reviewed by the province and must be reviewed and approved by the inspector municipalities before being brought back for 4th and final reading. The ACC bylaw is a bylaw of council and could be adopted shortly thereafter.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, what you're saying then, Mr. Heffernan, is that you would then, at this stage, should this go forward, you would then go to the development community, or would you develop the costs or possible costs to the development community and approach them at that point before they come back to council with the costs? Is that the idea? Or?
The approach that we have outlined to date would be to bring to council the draft rates and a revised program based on our conversation here today prior to going to the stakeholders for engagement. So we would look to have kind of the draft rates and project lists kind of to be reviewed by council, so to speak, and that way we can actually bring them rates that you've seen and then have that discussion with them at that time.
And then come back to council to be passed after that? I guess what I'm saying is if you're coming back to council with a draft of the costs and we pass it at that point, then it doesn't give the development community any...
We would simply look to just inform council of what the rates are and ask for basically your approval to move forward with stakeholder engagement. So we wouldn't be asking for any readings of the bylaw at that point. That would come after, once we have done the stakeholder engagement, and we would provide that feedback at the time when we come forward for 3 readings.
Okay, good. Thank you so much. Okay, questions or comments? Mayor Krogh, did you have a comment? No? Okay. Given everything we've heard, any comments from staff about direction as far as the recommendation? Mr. Lindsay?
Well, if you proceed with a recommended motion, I think there, like I said earlier, I still think there's a space for council to have the discussion when we bring back the draft rates. And I do think it'll be important for council to understand what both rates are when you're having a discussion. It'll be somewhat difficult to have just an ACC rate, I think, discussion without knowing where the DCCs are heading. So I think there's space there, but if council wants to have a separate discussion, and as Mr. Holmes said, this is really where I think council can prioritize your projects, is if you want to have a separate discussion about ACCs first, we're happy to return. I think we just ask for that to be clarified.
Okay, the wish of council. Mayor Croak?
Thank you, Chair. I'm prepared to move the recommended motion. I think we are very early days on this, and I wasn't being cheeky when I said this is a turtle, not a greyhound, for obvious reasons involving the provincial ministry, et cetera, all of those things, and consideration and examples and potential projects that may fit. And we just heard about one, I would say one of the favorites in town, which is the Waterfront Walkway. Ably pointed out that there are complications there. So this is early days, and that's all that staff are asking for at this point. And so I say let them get on with it in terms of the general language of the recommendation.
So you're moving the motion?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Thank you.
It's my nature. Sorry.
Seconder first, please. Is there a seconder? A second by Councillor Hemmings. Councillor Brown, you had a comment? Question?
I do. I'm happy to enter the discussion here. I'm happy to support this moving forward. But here's the thing: is I can't really talk about other projects. I do 100% agree that it will be great to see the DCC, the recommended DCC charges, and have that kind of conversation, because obviously we can't have the ACC conversation isolated from that. And some of those other questions and comments that were being made earlier around, sort of total cost charges, piece together. But what I would say this is it's hard to have a conversation. Like I said, I don't think these are bad projects. I would happily support them and have that conversation. It's just I don't know what other projects were considered are eligible or not, and so I don't want to say this project. So all I'm asking is if we could at least get a list of, even if it's just based on some of the things we've heard through city plan, just a list of sort of general projects that might be eligible. That would just, I think, really help inform either support for these or consideration of looking at some other projects. Because in absence of that, I could think of a whole host of things, but they may be eligible or partially eligible or something like that. So it's just an absence of information. It makes it hard to contextualize these and also ask about some of the other ones that didn't make. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manley, did I see your hand? No? Okay. Any other comments? Seeing none, the motion is on the floor as recommended. All those in favor? Anyone opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Okay. Thank you so much, Ms. Bernier, Mr. Hefferman. Thank you very much for being here and getting me through this. This was good for me. Thank you. Mr. Rosen, Ms. Brinkman, thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on. There are no questions, obviously, no members of the public here that have come when I was looking. Love it. Seconder, Councillor Eastmere. Honest to goodness, I'm going to get it. All those in favor? No one's opposed. Motion carried. Thank you.